Hello and welcome to the program. Ukraine and the IMF recently agreed on a new loan of almost $4 billion. Now, this is a result of tight negotiations over long-awaited reforms. Joining us in our studio today for an overview on this matter is Volodymyr Dubrovskiy, senior economist of the Center for Social and Economic Research in Ukraine. Hello and thank you for joining us.
Hello. So
first question, which is kind of a touchy subject, this IMF loans comes with a 20.5% increase of gas price. That was a requirement of the IMF to raise gas prices. How did the IMF came to this, and Ukraine came to this increase?
Oh, there were very tough negotiations about it, but actually Ukraine already in 2015 agreed to, or even 2014, agreed that the prices for gas should be equal for all kinds of customers. And it respected these obligations, gradually increasing the prices till 2016. But then, unfortunately, the world prices increased, and the prices for gas for individual customers and for so-called Теплокоммунэнерго, the sector in generating heat, heat generating sector, were not increased simultaneously because they are increased by the decision of the Cabinet of Ministry. And the gap between quasi-market prices and the prices that are actually paid is already over 60%. If it would be done simultaneously with increasing the world prices, probably it would be less painful. But the government was, for obvious reasons, reluctant to make it. And now it has to make it in the worst time possible before the election.
Before the election, because it's not really a popular decision. It won't be a popular decision.
Probably, that's my hypothesis, they thought that before the elections the IMF will not demand it so harshly as it was with Yulia Tymoshenko's government in 2009. But the IMF, for understandable reasons, is tired with Ukrainian governments that all of the time trying to trick it. And it insisted on respecting of these obligations, and also it made some compromise about 23%, not 60-something percent. But still, I'm afraid that the problem persists because, unfortunately, the main issue the IMF unfortunately overlooked is the reform of this whole sector. The government should have been starting this reform simultaneously or even previously to increase of the gas prices in 2014.
So you're saying it's not just little measures like increasing gas prices, also a whole structural reform is in play.
Exactly. And of course this reform is also painful, but not for the people. This time that it's painful for some oligarchs of local or national level that owns these enterprises. And unfortunately, the government did nothing about this. And should the government start do its homework before?
Just before.
Yeah, then I think these consequences would not be that painful for the population. Now, unfortunately, they are painful and they will be used by the populists.
Yes, because that's exactly my point here. How to, because it reaches this geopolitical and negotiations and political negotiations with IMF reach domestic policy. Do you think at one point it is possible for Ukraine to have a domestic policy which is not dependent from these situations?
I think it is not, because so far we have too much of foreign liabilities to pay. And it is partly fortunate because many of good things that were done in Ukraine so far were done under the pressure of the Western institutions. And it would probably, they would not be done without this pressure. The only question is that these institutions should focus on the real things, not just the formal things. and they should improve their understanding of the domestic policies and domestic institutional issues in order to make their still limited opportunities for pressure focused on the right things. As for instance, with corruption, probably last time we discussed corruption.
We discussed that.
Yes, they are misfocusing. And in this case, they are partly focusing right, because indeed the prices should be equal. But probably they should be more focused on the structural reforms, or, for instance, on the reform of the gas transportation. If the reference point for development for defining of the price would be in Ukraine, if the Western buyers would buy the natural gas on the border, Russian-Ukrainian border, and this would be a reference point, as for example the Naftogaz leadership offered, then the basic price would be lower.
Yeah. So this increase is going to come full in place on the 1st of November. You talked about the elections. You talked about the fact that populist party might use it. Is there any coming back from it? Because some parties, promised that they would decrease the price. But is it possible? Is it? Or?
Of course, some parties already did. Yulia Tymoshenko already said that she would decrease those prices. It is possible, but it will lead to substantial opportunities for rent, for corruption, as it did before. Because if there is a difference between prices,
there is a black market existing, and
some gas, could be arbitraged between the private consumers and the commercial consumers, and there are ample opportunities for this. Also, some observers suggest that it could be only possible if they struck a deal with Gazprom. And of course, striking a deal with Gazprom is absolutely a bad thing in our case, because Gazprom is heavily politicized, and it would mean striking a deal with Russia.
Which is, as of today, unacceptable, unless
absolutely unacceptable, because Russia is an aggressor, and it occupies the part of Ukrainian territory, and so on.
Now, that's interesting that you raised this, the issue of Gazprom, because some of Ukraine's ally, I'm thinking about the Minsk format, and Germany are pushing for Nord Stream, are pushing, for Gazprom to get into the market. How is it possible to conciliate, these two visions of helping Ukraine, and at one point, and in the meantime, having this striking deal with Russia?
Well, that's a question probably should be asked. This question should be asked to Germany. Of course, they have different interests, but I would say that yes, of course, they have their own interest, and they have their interest in preserving Ukrainian independence, and have the interest in getting cheap gas. We need to accept it as it is and find our own interest in it. I personally am not so afraid of losing this trend of transportation, the gas, into Europe, because this trend actually did a very bad job for Ukraine. All of the Ukrainian oligarchs, or many of them, grew up on this trend. Yes, and only a tiny portion of this rent normally went to the Ukrainian budget, and was indeed used for some all national purposes.
Now, coming back to the IMF, this loan goes through 2019. What about 2020? What about after? What's next?
Now the IMF is finishing a current program, which ends the end of this year, and they are not going to develop a new comprehensive large program, because nobody knows what will come out after the elections. So they are talking about a short-term program, which is for 1 year only, and then after this year they will decide with the new government what the new government will offer in order to pay back the debt, balance the budget, and so on. This is quite logic, because the new government would be uncomfortable respecting the obligations of this government. And also, this year is very important in terms of payments back the debts, because this peak is on 2019 and 2020s.
Now, and to conclude this interview from your expertise, from your point of view, elections or not, reforms or not, what should Ukraine do now to respect its requirements with the IMF, and to finally maybe reach one day stability, I mean financial stability, without the crutches of other...
Ukraine is now, for all of the last year, it's paying back the external debt. The debt is shrinking, although very slowly. But in order to become independent, it should first of all to speed up economic growth. And there are some measures that could help in it, but they are mostly out of purely economic policies. This is a rule of law. This is including the court system. This is better security for the business. And in terms of economic policies, this is first of all tax policies. It should shrink the size of the state, shrink the percentage of the GDP that it's redistributed through the state budget. Now it is as high as in Germany, which is incredible for such a poor country. Also, it should adopt right now the tax on withdrawn capital, which would free our business from a very corrupt and very politicized control of tax authorities. It should reform the tax authorities, because tax issues and issues related to tax administration are the main policy-induced impediment for doing business in Ukraine.
Okay, well, thank you for this overview. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio. Hope maybe have you again to talk more about this topic. That was Volodymyr Dubrovskiy, senior economist at the Center for Social and Economic Research in Ukraine. Thank you for sharing the program, and stay tuned for the rest.